We have with us Miss Aditi Rele for our another episode of Guest Talk Series 2021. Miss Aditi is currently working with Microsoft as the Director of ISV Solutions and Strategic Partnerships. She is a technical sales leader with an expertise in digital tech, cloud native, and large scale application architectures. She has built and led several strategic partnerships with ISVs, startups, and commercial platforms to help them grow into healthier cloud platforms. Ms. Aditi engages in a large number of interactive sessions with students, developers, and women in tech and encourage them to build niche skills. She has worked for the digital cloud technologies across geographies of UK, Australia, India, and the US. On behalf of the badge, ma'am, I welcome you. Over to you now.
Okay, so first of all, can I request someone to not sort of move the slides because I will lose track of what you will lose track of what I'm saying versus what you're seeing. So I will move it if that's okay. Okay, so first of all, guys, thank you so much for inviting me here. For those of you who don't know, Yash is my husband's cousin, and he was absolutely insisting that I should come and talk about what we do in the cloud computing space at some point in time. And thank you, Yash, for giving me this opportunity to speak to you guys. And also thank you, Apurva and Priyanka, for orchestrating this entire bit. So, the topic that you guys gave me was very interesting, enterprise innovation and agility with cloud computing. This is something that is top of mind for practically anybody in the industry today for various reasons. And we'll talk through those reasons and how we sort of, circumvent that. So, think of it this way, right? I mean, if you look at what is happening around you since the pandemic happened last March, 3rd of March, 2020, the day before we had gone to office, and the next day we were told that we cannot go to offices anymore. You guys were told that you can't go to colleges anymore, and students were told not to go to school anymore, right? At the same time, a lot of as much as this has affected us as individuals, a lot of this effect and impact was much larger for businesses themselves. Just imagine our banking customers who had never before thought about letting any of their employees get access to their environments from outside of their office, suddenly had to think about how can I be more productive how can I make my people more productive by being at home? There were, think of those ITES companies, the SIs, the Infosys and Wipros of the world, who would lock down your PCs, what is the thing called, the USB port, so that you couldn't take data out, right? Those guys had to suddenly think about giving access to their employees sitting from home. Think about those teachers, students, they're still very digitally savvy, but think about those teachers who've spent 50 years in the teaching industry, never having to worry about what it means to get on a computer and teach a bunch of people with Zoom. Think about those. So it was a big cultural shift that we were going through literally overnight. At our end at Microsoft, it was very interesting. We started getting phone calls from our customers saying, hey, you have to do something about this whole thing about working from home. We don't know how to contact each other. We don't know how to get access to our applications. We don't know if even if the people that are getting access, is it secure, and so on and so forth. So there was actually a pandemic in the IT world that was going on. So I remember at that point, overnight, we provisioned over 500,000 virtual desktops for our customers, literally overnight. So we were literally 24/7 creating environments that were secure, etc., for making this happen. So when we sort of start analyze what happened behind the scenes for us, right? There were really three problems to solve. One was to respond to the situation we were in. Respond to the situation in the sense, literally get our customers and partners up and working again. Get them environmental access, get their security and data access. Then we had to take a seat back and say, how do we restart their business? So right now we're just worrying about getting the infrastructure in place. How do we restart the business? In the sense, how do we get them to start talking to customers again? How do we make sure that their economic losses do not continue to grow? How do we make sure that people are empowered to run business processes now from remote environments? So that was the whole thinking around restarting. And then we were thinking about how are we going to shape the future? In the sense, how do we reimagine the infrastructure and the application landscape within within a enterprise customer, to ensure that something like that, God forsaken, happens again, they are ready and they are able to address the situation at the click of a button. The biggest beneficiaries from all of these pandemic that has happened, or rather not beneficiaries, I wouldn't say beneficiaries, but the people that have been the most agile have been able to come out of this really fast. The born in the cloud companies, people who have adopted the cloud for all of their infrastructure needs, people who had changed their policies, those are the people who really come out of this much faster. Compare that to our traditional companies who still had this environment, the thinking about, hey, we need to landlock our resources or landlock our infrastructure, and we only need to work on our own data centers, our own co-hosted locations, our own machines and PCs. Most employees in most organizations, and I would say almost 80 to 90% employees, did not have laptops to really work from home. It was just the privileged few, such as large IT companies or very advanced banking customers, etc., who had provisioned laptops, and that too for their senior employees. It wasn't a, it was a laptop being given to an employee was a luxury, dependent on how senior you are, what your level is, etc. Today, it's become a necessity. You absolutely need laptops to work remotely. I remember one of our customers coming and saying, look, I have 100,000 people that don't have machines. Clearly, I cannot go and buy them. What do I do? Because that will be a huge cost. And we told them that, why don't you start leasing laptops? Why don't you go hire laptops? And there was this whole ecosystem that got created just for lease and hiring of laptops for employees. Right. So this entire thinking around respond, restart, reimagine is basically been the foundation for any of the work that we've done over the last year and a half in relation to this pandemic. I'm also going to share with you some very interesting statistics, right? We regularly do surveys with customers to say what are their priorities? How do you think their journey to digital transformation is really shaping up? What is it that they need, and so on and so forth. So there's an interesting statistics here if you can read. 85% of the people said that they must offer digital services now or they'll become irrelevant. And this was a survey that was done in 2019. So the CIO team had basically said that 2 years down the line, if we don't start offering, not CIO team actually, the CXO team had said that 2 years down the line, if we don't offer digital services, we are going to be irrelevant. And look what's happening today, right? Most of these companies are struggling to survive. And they are looking at ways and means in which they can use this whole digital transformation, as we call it, or the fourth industrial revolution, as the world calls it, to their advantage to continue their journey. So our job as a technology leader, and this is not just for Microsoft, this is for every technology leader and for every technologist that works in this ecosystem, architects, developers, solution designers, the technical salespeople, students that are learning technology. Our job is to ensure that this reimagination is real with the right set of tools and technologies for our customers, so that we don't get into this discussion about the relevance of the business. If businesses go down, there's a huge impact on the economy. And our job is to make sure that we leverage technology to make sure that this doesn't happen with the businesses that we are interacting with. So considering the three things and the background that I laid out for you, in my mind, I look at the innovation in the cloud or agility as 7 buckets that I've listed out here. There is a need to think about how do we create a culture of modern collaboration, which is seamless communication between employees, their vendors, their customers, their partners, and so on and so forth. As an example, today, if there wasn't Zoom, we'd probably not be able to do this. If there wasn't Teams, we'd probably not be able to do this meeting. In a normal environment, you would have probably insisted I come down to Jamshedpur, wherever you guys are, and then talk to you about what is happening in this industry. Today, that is not possible. So we want to create like a modern collaboration, a seamless modern collaboration, such that it becomes a single workspace for everything. Whether you're doing email, whether you're approving leaves, whether you're calling somebody, whether you're doing a live meeting, etc. That's one thing. Then there is the thinking about how are we leveraging the cloud? What is the real relevance of cloud from a ROI perspective? How am I really leveraging the potential of the cloud? People have talked about, cloud computing. What is it? It's just a bunch of servers. It's a bunch of servers available to you at your flexibility. It's a bunch of servers available to you for scaling infinitely. This wasn't available to you previously because you were in a restricted set of data centers which had only a quantum number of servers. But because this is now globally connected and there are data centers all over the world, the Azure data center itself is about, if I'm not wrong, 60 by now. 60 data centers in the world, and it keeps changing every month. Our competition also has equal number of data centers. So the ability to use this entire compute power available to us for infinite scale, that is really cloud computing. Otherwise, it's not a different concept from what a data center offers to you today. And because you have this compute capability available to you, there is certain things that you can do to advantage to really leverage the ROI and cloud. And that's what cloud native architectures is all about. Also, because of the compute power, you have AI, which is sort of embedded, you would like to embed. And I like to think of AI as just not something that you do with data, but also something that you do at an application level, and most importantly for your insight. So I'll speak about that in a minute. Then then the next thing is about integration, right? Until now, we've always been very siloed in how we develop applications. The cloud gives you the ability to create very seamless integrations, not just for your own applications, but also communicating with your vendors, your suppliers, the entire supply chain ecosystem. So we'll talk about that a bit. Then there's about the data. So traditionally data, some of you guys might have studied this as part of your engineering courses. Some of you have worked in the IT industry, so you would know this. Data has always been about relational data, right? It's a matrix, a bunch of columns and a bunch of rows, and that tells you what the data really is and what it really means and what it can do for you. But data is so much more than that, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then it's about operations. How do you manage your entire ops when you're developing applications or developing cloud native applications on a very modern infrastructure? What do I mean by modern infrastructure? The infinite scale that I talked about earlier. So I will continue to use this modern infrastructure phrase just for you to sort of get used to it, because it is not different, but it is different from a traditional data center. And then all of this needs to be underlined by security. If we don't put security as the absolute foundation of the work that we do from a cloud computing perspective, everything is lost. The reason it's lost because the most important asset today for any enterprise is its data. And data breaches are very common. The more sophisticated the technology becomes, the more sophisticated cyber attacks become. And the more sophisticated the cyber attacks become, the more important controlling what is yours and controlling access to it is important. So these are the 7 things that I always think about when we talk about agility and innovation in the cloud. Okay, so let's drill down a little bit. And again, as we go through it, you will realize that most of the things are not new to you. You will know exactly what I mean as we go through it. A typical cloud journey. This is not. This is a sort of a framework that is used for any migration mechanism to the cloud. So whenever we go to customers and say, "Hey, you guys have to start leveraging the cloud for your applications, for your infrastructure, etc." This is the journey we take them through. Typically, any enterprise would have applications. It'll have a bunch of data supporting those applications, and it'll have the infrastructure. The first thing that we do is literally what we call as lift and shift. We take the entire application along with its data and along with its infrastructure and move it to the cloud. You've already got virtualized infrastructure in your data centers. It's just a question of taking a VM from here and plugging it into the cloud environment. Think of this as literally just moving from one DC to a cloud DC. Once you've done that, you then want to start thinking about how to modernize. So, for example, I love to take this example of in a wedding. When you're hosting a wedding for, let's say, 1,500 people, right? You're not going to go and buy a hall to service them. You're not going to go buy 1,500 chairs or 1,500 plates to serve them. What you're going to do is lease for just that day, right? You're going to lease the hall for that day. You're going to lease the chairs and lease the plates and lease the tables, because you want to get into a pay as you go model. Because if you buy the entire thing, it is going to be capex for you, and it makes no sense, because you're not going to do weddings every day. That's exactly what the cloud model is. What happens in the data centers in the age old days is that you always provisioned for peak. So let's say Diwali Dhamaka was going to happen, you would have all customers saying that throughout the year, I expect normal usage. Diwali, I expect 10 times more usage. Now on that day, I can't go buy new servers. So let me buy new servers from day one. So imagine how much wasted capacity there must have been on data centers. And then what happens is, when a Diwali Dhamaka happens and there's a really good sale and everybody wants to buy a product, becomes 20 times, you don't have enough capacity, right? So the whole refactoring and the re-architecting concept of the cloud is exactly that. You provision for mean, you don't provision for peak. And then you put in controls and balances to say, when my compute goes more than 60% or 70%, add a few more servers. Or when I reduce computing capacity to 20% or 30%, remove a few servers. That's how your pay-as-you-go model really works. So after we've refactored and re-architected to cater to the cloud environment and leverage the agility that the infrastructure gives us, you want to start thinking about cloud native. So what is cloud native really? So cloud native is, sorry, one second. Okay, let me just go here first, because I might have missed this. All right, what is cloud native? Cloud native is the ability to create your applications from a microservices, containers, functions perspective. I'm going to explain all of these terms in a minute, right? When you think about an application, say, take which is your most used, let's say Big Basket, right? You go to Big Basket. What is the typical thing that you do most? Where is the maximum time spent in Big Basket? It is in buying products, right? Putting stuff in the cart, right? And then the checkout process is literally 2-3 minutes at best. You just go to checkout button, put in your payment details, and you're done. Now, the concept of microservices is such, because your heavy usage is actually in the shopping aspect and in the in the putting it in the cart action, those will require maybe a higher computing power from a server perspective. But because your checkout action is literally just a click of a button and maybe one more step and done, you probably don't need extremely high compute power. So you will use lower compute machines to put that set of the system in. So when you develop something in microservices architecture, you're developing a very modular approach to different functions. And each function then has its own data, own business, own app layer, and so on and so forth, right? Native in the past, we've never done that. We've just developed one big monolith application with apps and business tier and data tier and so on and so forth. We're changing that to make sure that this modular approach becomes something that is an industry standard. Again, cloud native architecture is not just about Microsoft. The entire industry uses cloud native architecture. There is a cloud native foundation that defines how it is done. Once you've designed your application using microservices, then you put them into containers. Containers is just virtualization on top of your operating system. So that gives it even more agility to move around to wherever you want. Functions is an extremely important thing. With functions, you only literally, you don't have to worry about deploying your code at all. You just worry about the business logic. The entire application code is the entire infrastructure required to run that code is behind the scenes. So you write your application logic, you run it, and guess what? You only pay for the compute when that component runs. So it makes it extremely cost efficient for simple things like payments. You run the payment engine, you stop it, that's it. Imagine provisioning an entire virtual machine and then all the infrastructure on top of the systems and keeping that payment application there. It's probably being used, you know, and your own experience, go to any shopping site, you would probably spend very little time on payment. Why keep it running? Just use it as a function, finish the logic, get out, don't pay for it. uh, so these things, you know, microservices, containers, functions, APIs, the way you sort of build a very lightweight interface to your application, and then the entire DevOps process. DevOps again means how do you move from, like, we'll talk about that more in the operations, but how do we move from your development environment to production environment seamlessly, right? So this is what a typical cloud native architecture looks like, and here is when you get maximum ROI from your applications. Now, I want to step back and also talk about modern collaboration because I missed speaking about that. The slide should have been later. So, you know, when we talk about modern collaboration, it's probably the first order of business for us was to set up the seamless collaboration between people. The ability to create a single workspace, not just for meetings and callings and things like that that you need, but to also bring your line of business applications into a single workspace, right? So that you don't have to go anywhere. And most importantly, it is secure. And you can manage who's controlling access, who's accessing it, why the person is accessing it, where has the download happened. So somebody in the IT team sitting in some remote corner can monitor usage of everything in your environment when you create a modern collaboration suite, use a modern collaboration suite for your engagements. All right, so let's move on. Cloud native, we talked about that. The third imperative is around AI. Now, AI is interesting, right? I mean, the industry has typically looked at AI as a chatbot, somebody that is on your website or somebody who pops up and it's very annoying, I know, who comes and says, hey, how can I help you? Select from here and whatever. AI is not just about bots. AI is a lot more than that. You know, traditionally, we've talked about data and we've talked about what happened to the, what you know, when you do trend analysis, it's about what is the data telling me and what am I going to do with the data based on my own interpretation. What we want to move towards is based on what has happened, what will happen. We call that as predictive analytics. And after predicting what is going to happen, can it also give us prescriptive guidance on what we should do to not make that prediction come true, or make that prediction come true if it's a good thing, right? So this is what we call as predictive analytics and prescriptive analytics. So we want to go from a descriptive and diagnostic. Descriptive in the sense what has happened to the data, and therefore we analyze the data, and therefore diagnostic. Moving from descriptive and diagnostic to more predictive and prescriptive analytics of the data. That is what AI does for you. Today we can sit here, and you won't believe this, but today the way um, uh, seller quotas, so basically we get targets for the whole year, right, as part of our jobs. Our targets are not given to us by our managers or their managers or any leader on top. Our targets are given to us by an AI engine saying you did $100 last year. Based on the trends that I'm seeing, you should be doing $200 this next year. And to make those $200 happen, these are 5-6 things that you should do. So it becomes really, really simple for us from an execution engine perspective. AI is really helping us. And then throughout the year, it'll keep intervening to say, hey, I see this customer is going to churn. They're going to not do something that we want them to, or they're going to go to compete. And it keeps giving us signals saying, basis trends, this is what I'm seeing, and this is what you should do. I think that's a fantastic implementation of AI. We have partners like Spark Beyond and the others who've really taken AI to the next level. Blue Yonder, you guys remember the ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal for the longest time, right? So there's a partner that we work with called Blue Yonder, who is a supply chain. Basically, their expertise is in supply chain. They built an AI solution for their customers to say, how much inventory should be rerouted so that your business can continue and you won't suffer losses because of the ship being stuck and the inventory being stuck. If they hadn't done that, imagine the kind of losses people would have to suffer because their inventory was stuck. Now, Blue Yonder wasn't going to go and remove that ship out of the Suez Canal and do anything spectacular with AI. That's not possible. But just the rerouting of inventory, excess inventory in various regions, that itself saved a huge amount of monies for our customers. So that's what AI can do for you. Let's talk about the next one around integration. We're actually sitting on a 90 billion data market worldwide. What does that mean? You and I share data, we can monetize that data. Unfortunately, we've built, last 30 years, we've built applications that have been very sort of restricted in their own boundaries. We don't open our data to exploration. One of the early adopters of course, worldwide they've done this, but one of the very early adopters of this open data has been our own government, where they have exposed anonymized data around health, around payments, around the jobs and things like that for people to build applications on. This is a huge market, $90 billion worldwide. Now, and therefore it is important for us to start thinking about leveraging the cloud to create this open data economy wherein every application can consume and expose data. And there is mechanisms and provisions available for us to do that today and get our customers to leverage it to their advantage. A simplest use case is as follows. SAP hosts SuccessFactors on the cloud. Therefore, all the companies that use SuccessFactors, probably the data is with SAP. Now, exchange of information from other systems that an enterprise uses with SAP SuccessFactors, it's a big deal. Right. So this is the kind of data exchange we want to promote across, the cloud computing environment when we think about innovation and agility. All right, let's move to the next one, managed data. So I talked to you about data that we always call relational. So you've got rows and columns. You understand what this data really means. What do you do about information that is stored in emails? There is so much intelligence that is stored in emails. What do you do about all the intelligence that is stored in white papers, in PDFs and Word documents, in Excel sheets, and so on and so forth? Our non-relational or unstructured databases actually let us take advantage of all of this. So if now imagine this, right? You're trying to build business analytics as a product. You bring in data from the structured systems that are already built, but you also start bringing in information and insights from emails, from documents, from social feeds, from everywhere else that you see unstructured information. Imagine how rich your insights and analytics for your business is going to be. A very common use case of this is sentiment analysis on social, right? A lot of companies do that. What are my users talking about me on social? And then they pull out a whole bunch of analytics around it. Non-relational databases make use of that. And then there's a new technology not new, I mean, it's barely new anymore, but there's a technology that lets us cache this data so that we are much faster in sending this out. Traditionally, we've not used caching for databases. We've used caching for application tier, sometimes for the middle tier. But now we're saying use caching for data so that whatever information you want, you can throw back to the user really quick. Because there's a lot of computing that goes into this data at the back end, and therefore you can't spend cycles in that wheel churning for you and waiting for the data to come back. So therefore, managed data on the cloud is very different from what we are used to seeing a data being, right? And we should encourage our customers to make the best use of this. Next is on operations. So one aspect of operations is DevOps, which is basically saying that I'm in my development environment today. I want to create a seamless experience to my production environment. Traditionally, what has happened is that, sometimes because we physically moved code from one server to another for UAT and then from another server to production, we actually might have missed a library or two, or we might have gotten to an older version. And that has created a lot of chaos, a lot of rollbacks, and a lot of heartburn for the IT team and the dev team. Typically, in any organization, the dev team and the ops team actually sit separate and they don't even talk to each other. So DevOps is a mechanism in which we can really streamline this entire journey and say, when I write code and when I say this code is ready to publish to cloud, to production, it goes through a very seamless, what we call as pipelines, to make sure that all the checks and balances are done and it appears in production. I remember talking to a customer of ours who had 3 different environments for each customer. So by the time they got to 30 customers, they had 99 deployments of the same solution, which was a nightmare for them to manage. So imagine every time a new feature came in, they had to make that changes across 90 instances. And obviously that was creating a bit of a problem in terms of not just new customer acquisitions, but also provisioning a new customer that they got on board. So we actually worked with them in making this entire application suite DevOps enabled, and now they have literally 3 implementations for all of the customers that they onboard. That's what the power of DevOps is. But in addition, operations is also about asking your application to throw information back about why it is not doing well. So the application itself should say that, something is going wrong. In 5 minutes, I'm going to crash. Or in 24 hours, I'm going to crash. This sort of automation is something that we absolutely can make possible today, because the power of cloud is there, right? Troubleshooting, making sure that, if there is a sudden surge in the usage of the application, you can scale up to that level, making sure that you can scale down as required, making sure that there is very low zero downtimes. In the sense, most of our services offer 555, 999 or 59s availability. So how does that happen and how does that work? It's possible because of the infinite scale that cloud computing gives to you, and therefore we should make use of it as part of our innovation. And the last bit, this is the most critical element. Any application, any not application, any IT, when you think about it, there is security needs to be at a foundation of it. So there is the application security, which is your apps data security. Then there's the infrastructure security. Where are you putting your infrastructure? How are you securing that infrastructure using application firewalls and things like that? Then there's a network security, the infrastructure sitting inside a network. And now, because we are remotely working, the network is the entire world. So how do you protect your network, secure your network? And the most important element of this is what we call as access to data security. So as a user, if I'm accessing it, how do I secure myself? This is what we call, this is an element that we called as conditional access, and basically protecting your apps, devices, and making them secure for any users to connect from anywhere. Then we enable something like a single sign-on with Azure AD. So forget the Azure part of it, with Active Directory, let's say. So what happens is, I'm a user. Every day I log in from Mumbai into my machine, okay, which is great. The system has learned that I've logged in from this IP address, this location, and so on and so forth. Tomorrow, suddenly I'm in Africa and I'm logging into the machine from Africa. What should the system do? My password is correct. My username is correct. I have all the right signals from identity perspective. Should I authorize the user? The system learns that, look, you cannot get from Mumbai to Africa in the next 15, 20 minutes. And therefore, there must be something wrong. Maybe the identity is stolen. Therefore, the system itself prompts us back to say, look, I don't think you're right, and I'm not going to give you access to this. So who has access is important. When that person has access and to what that person has access. So the authentication part, do I have the access to the right set of resources? And the authorization, can I actually access the systems itself, is a big deal. This entire thing that I just talked about, whether it is multi-factor authentication, whether it is conditional access, all of this can be possible only when you get a lot of signals from the entire universe around where there could be a potential threat. So because we work across the infrastructure layer and the device layer, and anything to do with tech connect, or anything to do with an internet connect, we get a lot of these signals. We also share signals with other security companies. So Symantec would share signals with us, we would share with them, and so on and so forth. And that is how we're able to identify threats across the world and block them. So yeah, I think that's about it. So really, I know we're sort of at 30 minutes. So these are really the 7 things that I keep in mind when we talk about enterprise agility, and innovation. What is important for you to understand is this: when you guys get out into the industry after this, and again, not all of you or not many of you are going to be in the IT field, in the tech domain, but you're going to start working on business processes and functions that are extremely IT driven. Today, every board, in the sense a company board, is talking about digital transformation as their key priority. So irrespective of what your background is or what you're going to do in the future, technology is going to be the foundation of it. And therefore, understanding these bits about how cloud computing really helps you and how cloud computing can take your business to the next level is important. Uh, I want to use Blue Yonder as an example again. The supply chain team that was building the solution, or the business domain experts that were helping understand supply chain to the developers, needed to understand what AI brings to the table to be able to build a super robust product that could do what they did when the Suez Canal happened. And this is true with everybody. You talk about PTC, which is doing industrial IoT with AR, VR. Without understanding what these technologies bring to the table, they wouldn't be able to innovate. So you look at our own companies, Bajaj Finance, whether it's Mahindra, whether it's L&T, all of these construction companies, without understanding what technology brings to the table, they wouldn't be able to transform and innovate on their own and realize their digital technology priorities. So I'm really wishing you all the best. Make sure that you use this knowledge to your advantage as you go forward. It is going to be beneficial for you in every industry that you go here on. So thank you so much. I'm happy to take any questions if you have. And I hope this was useful.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I myself could relate to a few of the things you have explained, like DevOps and all. I've worked on those areas. Okay, so I think we have a couple of questions from the batch. Priyanka?
Yes.
Over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Priyanka. So we'll be taking up the questions. Hello, ma'am. We'll be taking up the questions now. So anyone who wants to grab this opportunity, please raise your hand.
Okay. So I see Tamiri, Arjun Tamiri. Arjun.
Yes,
yeah.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please, Arjun. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much, ma'am, for giving us insights in the digital transformation. So recently, I was also I just worked upon the Microsoft Power Platform as well. So just wanted to understand from your perspective, how is it different from cloud? Is it a part of the Microsoft Cloud, or is it something different which Microsoft is offering recently?
Yeah, so the Power Platform is definitely a part of the entire Microsoft Cloud. It is built on top of the entire computing platform. Now, here is why it is relevant, right? So think of it like that, Arjun, that today, all the development activities is done by developers, right? So for the smallest thing that one needs to do, and I'll give you an example, I think that is much better. I was working with the scooter company in Pune. I won't name it, but you would know who it is. They wanted to do a offer. They wanted to launch an offer for Valentine's Day, wherein if anybody bought a scooter, they would get a certain amount of discount and a nice hamper and so on and so forth. Now, this idea came to them only on 5 days before. And the marketing team got this idea, say we should do something for Valentine's Day 5 days before. So they went to the IT and said, hey, we want to develop this application where we want to collect leads. We want to put out flyers and we want to collect leads. Very simple, just one form, and people will enter their names, and those will be lead generated for us. The IT came back and said, no, it'll take 3 weeks to provision a server, because they didn't have any server. So what do you do in such cases? You've got an idea you want to realize in the next 5 days. So what these guys did was they basically came to us and we sort of helped them out. But separately, what these guys could have done is use Power Platform to create their own application. So Power Platform is basically meant for power users to create applications, chatbots, visualizations, agents to talk to each other, workflows, and so on and so forth, without the intervention of IT. At the same time, this is fully governed. So the IT will know exactly who has developed the application, which data they're consuming for. So the Power Platform, the concept of Power Platform is basically to optimize and leverage the non-IT resources in the company and get them to start creating business processes. So if you use this with EY, fantastic. You would have experienced that yourself in terms of how easy it is to create any application using Power Apps per se.
Yes, it's almost all equivalent to no code platform,
It is a
nearing
no
towards
code,
that.
yeah. It is a low code, no code platform.
Yep,
We
yep.
call it a low code, no code platform. Yes,
Yep. Thank you so much, ma'am.
most welcome. So Rahul, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hello, ma'am. Thank you very much for a wonderful session on cloud computing and AI. My question is, can you just throw some light on Microsoft Quantum, that is open cloud quantum computing ecosystem that Microsoft has developed?
So I'll tell you what, there is a colleague of mine called Shalaka Verma. You should follow her on LinkedIn. She's one of our quantum computing champions. And the best person to answer this question is Shalaka, to be really honest, because I'm not well versed with quantum. I know there are a whole bunch of use cases that we can enable using quantum computing. But none of this is in production. I don't think anybody has quantum in production yet. They're all experimenting with what it can really do, what kind of computing capacity you require. Obviously the costs are very high right now, but it's a very interesting field. And if you follow Shalaka, she's doing a phenomenal job of understanding all of this and explaining to noobs like us on what quantum is.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rahul. Ankita, do you want to go next?
Thank you for addressing us. Hello, am I audible?
Yeah, now you are, Ankita. Earlier you
Okay,
weren't.
sorry, it's raining quite heavily here. So.
No problem.
So thank you first of all for taking your time on a Friday evening and addressing us. That's a big thing.
I know we should be partying, right? No
As it's the same. So what are the factors that organizations should take into technologies while
So we are losing you, Ankita.
so sorry.
Do you wanna type out your question and I can pick it up after the next one?
Yeah, sure, that would be better.
Super, thank you. Deepshika, do you wanna go next?
Yes. Hi, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Firstly, thank you for sharing your insights on cloud computing. And recently I read that Microsoft Azure is one of those cloud computing services that is used like by more than 80% of the top Fortune 500 companies.
95%. 95%.
Yes. Now it is, right. That is very correct. What is it that makes Microsoft Azure so different from the other cloud computing services like Amazon, AWS, or the Google Cloud platform?
That's an interesting question. Look, here is the thing, right? Every cloud computing platform has its merits and demerits, right? Azure is fantastic. It's got a lot of services. It's got a lot of innovation happening on top of services. AWS has been, much ahead of Azure at some point in time. They started much earlier. We came from the behind, like we always do, and we've sort of won this cloud war. But I don't think as technologists, we should really sit here and compare what is the benefit of Azure versus AWS versus Google and everybody else that is out there. What is important to understand is what does the company bring to you as a whole package. See, Microsoft is not just another cloud vendor. We just don't do Azure business. In addition to Azure, we have the modern work, we have the business applications, we have the Power Platform, like your colleague mentioned. We also do a lot of work on what you call as perpetual infrastructure, which people have used traditionally. The thing that works for us is the consolidation of all of these platforms that come together, and that power is not for any one of our competition can get. Now you will always see this debate, Azure versus AWS versus GCP. Sometimes somebody's doing something better, sometimes somebody's doing something different. That is not the right comparison, because what is it, right? Like I mentioned in the beginning, it's just a set of data centers which is all over the world and it's globally connected. So it's not rocket science, really. Anybody can set up. If you have the money and if you have the wherewithal, anybody can set up a cloud computing environment. The differentiator is how we consolidate and bring the power of the platform together. We have always been a platform company. We started with VB. We started with after VB, we went to .NET. .NET was a universally used development platform. Almost 99% of developers use .NET as a platform for building applications. That power is what the company brings to the table. The development power. Today, we are also able to support Java. We are able to support PHP. That the reason we can do that is because we are a platform company. It's not just about Azure. It's about Azure. It's about Office 365. It's about Windows. It's about security. It's about business applications. It's about Power Apps. It's about data. It's about AI. It's the entire platform that comes together. It's also about search. It's also about gaming. It's also about the SaaS companies that we work with. So, all of that, when it comes together, it's a huge value proposition for our customers, which is why Azure is doing better than the others. I know this wasn't probably what you wanted to hear, but I generally discourage a technology to technology comparison because that's not the right thing to do. But thank you for that question. Thank you, Deepshika. Nirdesh, do you want to go next?
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yes.
Thank you for the session, ma'am. It was really insightful. And I would like to pick up from a reference you made about Blue Yonder. So I have had the experience of working with Blue Yonder Catman, implementing Catman solutions. And I would also like to point out the fact that Blue Yonder solutions are based out of the Microsoft platforms, which is very incredible. Now, this brings me to my question that I read that recently during the start of this year, Microsoft has also introduced this cloud platform in retail. So where does Microsoft see itself in the retail domain in the near future?
Yeah, see, that's a really, really good question, Nirdesh. Thanks for asking that, and good evening to you. See, one of the things we've realized over the last 8-12 years of this whole cloud computing era is every industry has its own requirement from a cloud perspective, right? So in say finance, it is really about how secure and how fast we can do transactions. With retail, it is about how we can pick up computing for heavy loads, like in case of Spark Beyond, etc. Right? So what we've done is we've created something called industry clouds. There's one for healthcare, one for retail, one for FSI, and etc., which are essentially base platforms for companies to build on. Right? So we can go to a retail company and say, hey, we really understand, and the reason we can say this with confidence is because we've hired people from the retail industry as experts. So we really understand the collective knowledge of what is required for digital transformation in the retail space. And therefore, we've created this platform. This platform gives you insights and analytics based on a certain kind of data. It gives you the ability to create applications and so on and so forth. And then we make this available to a customer. So think of it as a 30-40% starter kit for cloud. Instead of just giving you Azure, or think of it as a pizza base with a nice layer on top of it, and you just put the ingredients on top of it and start eating it. It's like that. So that is what we're trying to do for all industries. Just last week, we also announced an industry cloud for sustainability. So underlying all of this, we also want to make sure that sustainability is the key and we move towards green energy. So these are some of the initiatives we are trying to move towards a more customized, industry-focused computing. Make sense?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Thank you, Nirdesh. Anshika.
Hi, ma'am. Ashika this side. Hi, ma'am.
Ashika, sorry. Ashika. Yeah. Nice to meet you, Ashika.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you for joining us today on a Friday evening. Ma'am, I just have a small question that I just want to know your thought on this thing. There are discussions and conversations going on that cloud computing does not have that much of security even now, data security. So what is your thought on this? I mean, are we at that stage that we can risk our organization's data over cloud computing?
That's a great question, Ashika. So let me start with saying that your organization's data is more secure in the cloud than it's on on-prem. Okay, now let me explain why. So first things first. Remember how I said that we get a lot of signals from a lot of people, the threat signals. So we get, I wish there was a slide I could show you on that. So we get terabytes and terabytes of information every day on threat signals and cyber, cases per se, right? What that helps us do is create solutions that can patch our infrastructure much better and much faster, right? Now, what happens is when your systems are in the on-premise world, getting these threat signals to you is dependent on your IT man. So if your IT man is holidaying in Hawaii, he's not going to patch the systems, and therefore you're going to have a breach. And this is a real case that I'm telling you. There are at least 5 or 6 cases that have happened in the last 1 year because of these remote environments where there have been cyber attacks and there have been ransom attacks, where you just get a blue screen and you say that if you don't pay me $1 million in whatever currency format, we will not restart your machines. So your data is definitely more vulnerable on-prem, but people don't understand. I'll tell you what, most companies that you go to, they would buy the best of breed security products to secure their entire environment, except that these products don't talk to each other. So, I was talking to this IT company in Pune one time, and they said we have 56 security products. And we told them, you replace 26 of them with just one product that we can give to you, right? From a cloud perspective. Now, you might say that, hey, this is just a sales pitch and, this is just a story that you tell people and so on and so forth. So let me explain to you what we've done to make sure that this happens, right? When Azure came to India, the first thing we did was went to MeitY, Ministry of IT and Telecom, Ministry of IT and Technology. And we told them that, look, we are bringing a data center here. We know you're going to have data residency and data privacy challenges. Test us out. And so they did. And Azure was the first cloud provider who got a certification from MeitY to say that we're good. We have no concerns on security, governance, data residency, data privacy. Then we also went to IDBRT, which is a body that sits out of Hyderabad that defines rules for how data should be managed in regulated industries. So regulated industries are health, BFSI, and others. We went to them and said, let's sit together and work out. Although MeitY has certified us, let us work out on a set of checklists. So we created some 250 items of checklists with IDBRT to say that this is what you need to ensure that your cloud environment is secure. Okay, so that's the second thing that we did. Then we went to SBI and we said to SBI that, look, you guys are thinking about completely revamping the image of the State Bank of India from what it was 45, 50 years ago, a traditional government bank, to a very new age youth focused bank. How do we get you to do digital transformation with cloud and use power of cloud computing? So we got SBI to start leveraging Office 365 and Azure. And when a big bank like SBI sort of opens their eyes and says, I'm not worried about security on the cloud, everybody else can follow suit. Right. So, I mean, there's one thing to say that, and again, if you look at Azure's compliance page, you will realize there are 95 compliance certificates, and there's a whole team sitting out of Redmond whose day job is to go after every security and compliance certification that there exists. So any country, any body, industry body comes up with a compliance certificate, Azure wahan pe pahunch jata hai saying, I'm ready, test me out. Right. So we have 95 such compliance certificates today. And we will continue to add more as people create more and more these things. So there's one thing to say, what does your platform offer? It's another thing to say, what have we done with it, with the government, with the regulatory bodies, and with some of our marquee customers to prove to you that your data is more secure on the cloud. I hope that answers your question, Ashika.
Definitely, ma'am. I mean, SBI was a really big step.
Yes, SBI was a very big step. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
You're most welcome. Okay, who's next? Abhishek. Sorry,
Hello,
Ankita. Ankita. Sorry, Abhishek. This is Ankita whose hand is up. Really sorry for that.
No worries.
No, ma'am, I'll type my question. Actually, my internet
residual.
was there. Yes,
okay, fine. Abhishek, it's you next then.
Yeah. Ma'am, so I can go now.
Yeah, please do. Please.
Okay. So, ma'am, thanks for all the insights. I mean, I could relate to each and every word. A brief intro about myself. I've been working with Infosys for over 8 years. Last, I was working for 3.5 years at a bank in Boston. And I remember having all these discussions, whatever you were having with our client, because we were having the entire deployment on monolithic deployment. So I remember the good old days when we were doing the deployments on JBoss. And I remember that all that trouble we were having.
Yes.
And then we started, breaking our entire application into small, microservices. And then we moved to container, Docker deployments and all those things. And I remember taking EC2 instances and doing small testing. And basically you talked about customer cloud journey. Basically, I felt like it's the journey that I've seen before my eyes and
awesome.
Seen that transition. So my question, ma'am, to you is what's next? Like after cloud, what's next? And also there is a price involved. There's a cost involved in this entire transition. So how to convince people and how to make it more universal?
Okay, so your first question on what next after cloud, I think cloud itself has a very, very, very long way to go. Okay, first of all, if you just look at our customer base, across the world, you would realize that maybe only about 20-30% of their infrastructure is on cloud today. We are actually talking to CIOs who are telling us by 2025, we want to have zero DC footprint, zero footprint on data centers. We also heard them talk about this for 2021, but that didn't happen. So now the timeline has shifted. So I think as we speak today, we are still in the process of, the first two elements, which is lift and shift, refactoring, etc. We've not really gone to the whole re-architecting and, cloud native bits and all that. That's one. Secondly, there are a lot of elements that are sort of missing and coming up. So for example, we didn't have multi-cloud is going to be the norm. People are going to bet on Azure, AWS, GCP, and every other player that is out there to basically de-risk themselves to a great extent. But to be able to do that, we need to come up with technology that can manage environments across these clouds. There's no point in having 3 different environments to manage, right? It should be seamless. So recently we announced, and these are all learnings that are coming out of the journey to the cloud. So recently we announced a product called Azure Arc, which helps you manage your data and apps and so on and so forth across any computing environment, on-prem, data centers, hosted, co-location, other hyperscalers, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of innovation that is happening from an AI perspective. So the what I told you about AI is just probably scratching the surface. There is a significant growth potential out there to make things happen. So I think we are just about the industry is just about getting started with cloud computing. We are nowhere close to a maturity level to even think about what happens after cloud. And then again, think about it, right? All of your innovation around, say, augmented reality based learning, or data science, taking the next step towards that, all of that is actually based on cloud. So I don't think cloud is going anywhere. It will always be the foundation. Now coming to the cost question, see, cost is obviously important because somebody has to pay for that infrastructure that is running all over, right? But as the usage of cloud increases, the cost will automatically lower. And this is true for not just players like us, hyperscalers like us, but also customers. As they move their solutions to the cloud, they will realize that the computing capacity they require can be optimized, and therefore it will come down. One of the things we charter our technical teams on is to optimize your infra costs. So at one point, the sales team might be saying, hey, consume more, do more on the cloud, get more solutions to the cloud. At the same time, the technical team is looking at it and saying, hey, we can optimize this, don't need this server, don't need this service, remove this. This is it's a dev test environment, shut it off in the night when nobody's working. So all of these, to and fro's will keep happening to create an optimized environment. So yes, costing is important, but there are ways to manage and optimize cost. One of the fundamental things that is happening is for customers and their CFO to basically change their what we call as financial books from a capex model to an opex model. That itself is a big change, and then this whole story around pricing can really make sense. So I hope that answers Abhishek what you were saying, what
Yeah,
you were
ma'am.
asking.
I'm completely convinced, and I'm sure there's a lot of takeaways. Next time I'm having a discussion with the client, I'm sure I can utilize a
Sure.
lot of inputs what you gave.
All the
So
best
thanks a
to
lot
you.
for-
All the best to you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Sivakami.
Hello, ma'am. Very good evening.
Good evening to you,
So,
Sivakami.
yeah, ma'am, I have around 7 years of experience from TCS. So I have seen how cloud transformation is happening, and especially during the COVID crisis, we were shifting from the legacy system to the cloud system. So, what do you think, from your perspective, are the challenges for this transformation, achieving it from the legacy system to the cloud transformation? Even now, schools have started using it because of the online classes. So, what are the challenges from your perspective, ma'am? And another question about
Challenges
diversity
for adoption of the
cloud.
okay, yeah,
And
okay.
another question about the diversity inclusion. I was seeing your LinkedIn profile. So there I was coming across the diversity inclusion factor. So how is it in Microsoft? So I would like to know about women leadership at Microsoft too, ma'am.
That's a good question. So, okay, so let's take your first question. What are the challenges we typically see to cloud computing, right? To transitioning to cloud computing, right? See, there are multiple things. For the first challenge, like I mentioned earlier to Abhishek, was the fact that the CFO needs to change their books from capex to opex. Unless they actually do that in the books, they're still going to give the CIO some money, and the CIO is going to decide how to use it or not use it. So that mindset shift is the first thing. The good part about that is that the board of every company realizes that without technology, they will not achieve their next phase of growth. So that's a very good thing, because then we can force digital technologies into the organization holistically. The second challenge we face is that while the CIO office understands the importance of these technologies, the business probably is still struggling to say, how do I leverage it to our maximum capacity? So a lot of our time actually goes in educating the businesses, how to leverage the new technologies that are available to them now. The third one is around expertise of the developer community itself. So such as yourself, such as Abhishek, such as myself, to think about cloud first. When you think cloud first, your architectures will look very different from what they used to look about 10 years ago. Right? So that is our biggest challenge today. And one of the things we keep doing, therefore, is to continuously drive trainings, hackathons, etc., to educate developers on how to, work effectively with the cloud. So those are some of the things that we regularly face. There are other things that are probably not as prevalent. So, for example, somebody being a little wary of what happens if I'm moving, let's say, an SAP instance to the cloud, and something happens to the cloud and it sets back. So there again, our education is important, because high availability is intrinsic to the cloud. Usage of high availability, the customer has to do. We can build it out, but they have to use it. So things like that is what we typically face as challenges. Now, coming to diversity and inclusion, see, Microsoft is a very, 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 very inclusive culture. Okay, you will see a significant amount of women leadership. In fact, as we are talking, if I just look at our CVP, he's got one sec, let me just check for you right away. I think he's got more women in his leadership team than men. So let me just check that for you. Okay. So yeah, so he's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 women leaders versus 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 men. Okay, so there is in the India leadership team, India senior leadership team, that is the kind of ratio that our leader has today, and he has created this culture of creating diversity, of course, being the focus of creating not just gender diversity, but also age diversity, bringing in young talent, creating all the kinds of bringing in a lot of different people with different opinions and different thought processes into the organization. And that has trickled down itself. If you look at the second layer of leadership, so my manager's leadership, we are 2 women and 3 men in his team. So across the continent, across the country, there are a lot of women in the leadership team as compared to men, and that has been a conscious effort. And then I talked about gender diversity also, which is another thing. We have a lot of young people coming into the company as compared to seniors. In terms of inclusion, see, this company, the foundation of this company is inclusion. Satya has been driving this notion of empathy, diversity, and inclusion top down as an approach. And therefore, you will find a lot of people and a lot of initiatives that are continuously run for D&I to be mainstream. We have, as part of our core commitments, in the sense, we have targets for the year. And one of the targets for the year that we have to take is also about what are we going to do differently from a diversity and inclusion perspective. You can't put a dollar value to it, but the activities that you do are supremely critical for this company. D&I is a very core priority for the organization. And of course, it's great when you get to work with different people to make that real. Does that help, Sivakami?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. It was great interacting with you.
Thank you so much.
Ma'am, if you have time, we have 2 more questions from Archita and Ankita.
Sure, let's go ahead.
Archita.
May I go ahead?
Please do, Archita.
Yeah, I wanted to know a bit about Cloud PC and how is it different from Azure Virtual Desktop? And why is this launch expected?
The launch is, I don't know when the GA is going to happen, but it is available for you to provision in the inner ring if you want. It's a really long answer, Archita, to think about Cloud PCs and Cloud PC in the sense of Windows 365 that we just announced versus Windows Virtual Desktop. I'm going to send you a link. Please look through that. The essence is that we want to be able to create an environment irrespective of where you are, what device you are, what machine you are. So you can be literally on a Android device and create a Cloud PC for yourself using Windows 365 and create it. So that's really the construct. But I'm happy to send you a link to go into more details, because otherwise I'll take another 1 hour to talk about just that. And I literally, since it was announced, I think about 2 weeks ago, we've just gone through a learning session on that. So it's very sort of there in my mind. So don't make me start talking about it for 1 hour. Yeah, sure, I'm happy to send you a link to do that. All right. So which is the last question then?
Ma'am, I'll go. I've typed my question as well, but I'll just try it once again. So actually, I have worked in the financial sector for the past 2.5 years. So I've seen that they have been quite back when adopting to cloud. So they were quite resistant toward adopting to cloud because of security reasons and other different reasons. So now when they're trying to migrate to cloud, they're facing a lot of technological compatibility changes, issues. So they are facing a lot of those compatibility issues. So what would you suggest to organization they should keep in mind while choosing technologies or tools so that, such a cloud computing experience is not a tough task for them?
Yeah. So the first thing, Ankita, is that, again, I just explained how we've sort of circumvented the security conversational barriers. But the first thing to remember is that you can never replicate your infrastructure as it is on the cloud. There will be certain changes that you have to make so that the outcome will be the same. But because it's a different environment, you cannot expect that everything that you configure in the cloud will on-prem will also happen on the cloud. And it took a lot of time for our customers to realize this, especially in the banking and especially in the regulated industry, a lot of time to realize this, that I can't literally take my setup that is on-prem and move it to the cloud. So what we did is created what we call as landing zones in Azure. So these are, if you will, like a blueprint of how an infrastructure should look like. and we helped our customers deploy those landing zones so that it makes it much easier to move applications to the cloud. And again, all of these concerns that you just talked about, they just disappeared because we would have created a blueprint for them already. Does that help?
Yes, ma'am. That helps.
Awesome.
Because I've seen this, it was like really
Yes,
something which
it's
was
a real
coming.
problem. It's absolutely a real problem.
Okay, so we are done with the questions now, ma'am.
All right, great. So thank you again, all of you, for, we've actually spent half an hour more. So thank you for listening in. And I really hope this is useful to you. And thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, ma'am. It was indeed a great interactive session for us. On behalf of entire batch of Executive PGDM XLRI, I would like to thank you for the captivating and informative session on cloud computing. We all could relate to what you were saying. Thank you for taking out time from your busy schedule, ma'am, and sharing your informative, invaluable experience and knowledge with us. We are looking forward to having more such sessions with you.
Thank you so much. And you guys have a great weekend. And thank you again. Good night.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Aditi.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
We can leave, right?